There is a sound the intercessor-class long-range array makes when it receives a distress signal from a registered vessel. A low, three-tone chord. Almost polite. Almost apologetic for interrupting. I had heard that sound 417 times in my career as a signal arbiter aboard the Vethnaro. 417 distress calls, logged, triaged, dispatched or declined according to the Compact's resource protocols. I had never once lost sleep over a single one of them. The 418th came in on a dead channel. Not a registered frequency. Not a recognized encryption standard. Not even a proper language, at first, just rhythm, pressure, repetition. A pattern punched through static like something knocking on the hull of the universe from the outside. My second chair, Osaveth, said it was probably a beacon malfunction from one of the outer mining rigs. Possibly Veluan debris. He pulled up the decay probability tables and pointed at a column of numbers that agreed with him. I noted his reasoning in the log. Filed it under probable equipment artifact. Then, the voice came through. And, the voice said, in fractured but unmistakable coalition standard, that there were 43 personnel aboard the Crestfall Station orbital platform, that the Kreth Dominion had breached 3 of their 6 pressure locks, that their garrison was down to 11 combatants, and that they needed help. Osaveth said, Human Station. Let the Compact Auxiliary handle it. They have a patrol vessel in that corridor. I checked. The Compact Auxiliary Patrol Vessel had been reassigned 6 rotations ago. Budget reallocation. The corridor was empty. Osaveth shrugged with all 4 of his secondary arms, which in Valesi body language means something between not my problem and, the math doesn't work out in their favor anyway. He went back to his tables. I sat with the signal for 11 minutes. Here is what I knew about humans. At that point in my career, they were a mid-tier coalition species, relatively new, biologically unusual in ways the xenobiology attaches found mildly interesting. They had joined the coalition 43 standard years ago. They were known for being loud in communal spaces, for forming inexplicable attachments to non-sentient animals, and for consuming a hot liquid beverage made from roasted seed husks that smelled, according to the last atmospheric survey of their primary station, like something between industrial solvent and something almost pleasant, a combination that seemed to describe them in general. They were not known as a military species. They were not known as survivors. I transmitted the signal to the Compact Auxiliary Dispatch. Marked it Priority Amber. Filled out the supplementary forms. Did my job. The response came back in 40 minutes, auxiliary assets unavailable. Recommend Coalition Fleet stand by. ETA 31 standard hours. The Crestfall voice, when I re-established the channel to relay this information, was quiet for a long moment. Then, it said, copy that. We'll hold. Osaveth laughed. I did not. I don't know why. I had no data suggesting laughter was inappropriate. I had every data point suggesting laughter was the rational response to a species attempting to hold a 6-deck orbital platform against a Kreth Dominion assault force with 11 personnel and a 31-hour wait. I just did not laugh. I pulled up everything the Vethnaro had on Crestfall Station. I brewed myself a container of the terrible seed husk liquid that Osaveth kept in the break bay and that I had, apparently, started drinking somewhere in the last 2 cycles without noticing. I opened a private observation log, not an official one, not one subject to Compact audit, and I titled it simply, What Happens Next? What happened next was not what I expected. It was not what anyone expected. It changed what I knew about the word hold. The signal didn't die when I expected it to. That was the first thing. I had done the math. 11 combatants against a Kreth boarding force. The Dominion didn't send fewer than 30 to a station breach, and 30 was the polite number, the number they sent when they wanted the occupants to have just enough hope to consider surrender before the end. The math said, signal degradation within 4 to 6 hours, calm silence within 8, station neutralized by the time the coalition fleet response window opened. By the 3rd hour, I had begun composing the incident summary. Osaveth had gone off shift. The Veth narrow hummed its usual frequencies around me: recycled atmosphere, tertiary drive vibration, the faint magnetic pulse of the navigation array doing its endless sweeping, and I sat at my station with the signal in one ear and a cold container of that terrible human beverage in my primary grip. I want to be precise here, I was not waiting. Arbiters do not wait. We monitor. There is a distinction, and it matters, and I repeated it to myself at approximately the 40-minute mark when I noticed I had stopped filling in the incident summary. The signal crackled. Not degrading. Shifting. Someone had adjusted the transmission frequency, not the automated beacon's drift, which I knew the signature of, but a deliberate, manual retune. Someone on Crestfall was actively managing their communications array. I leaned toward my console. In the background of the transmission, behind the static and the distant pressure hiss of compromised atmosphere, I could hear something. It took me a moment to parse it, because nothing in my training prepared me for the context. It was a human voice, close to the transmitter, not speaking to me. It was counting. 11, 12, yeah, that's a ceiling joist, don't touch the 13, 14, Kowalski, I swear to the void if you've moved my patch kit again. A second voice, further away, it's in the emergency locker where it belongs. The emergency locker is on deck 4. Yes. A pause. Then, why is my patch kit on deck 4? Because deck 4 has the breach. The counting resumed. I noted this in my private log. I wrote, personnel accounting for structural damage. Methodical. No audible distress indicators. Then, I crossed that out and wrote, they are cataloging a compromised station ceiling while a Dominion assault force is presumably still aboard. Then, I crossed that out too and just wrote, Kowalski. Because that was the name the second voice had used, and the second voice had the particular flat, compressed quality of someone speaking through a helmet seal, and I found myself, for reasons I could not immediately taxonomize, wanting to know more about whoever was in that helmet. By hour 5, I had established a partial picture. Station Crestfall was a Coalition-registered orbital science and relay platform, 6 decks, crew complement of 43. Owned and operated by a human private concern called the Meridian Outreach Consortium, a name that sounded institutional and, turned out, on closer inspection, to be 4 humans and a business license. The station sat at the edge of the Karath Passage, which was useful real estate because the passage was the most direct trade corridor between the inner coalition systems and the resource-dense outer rim. It was also, and this was the relevant detail, aggressively contested by the Kreth Dominion, who considered the passage theirs by ancestral claim and coalition interference in their ancestral claim a personal offense. The Dominion had been running station seizures along the passage for 14 months. 11 stations. 11 clean, efficient actions. The pattern was always the same: they breached, they secured the crew as negotiating leverage, they filed a territorial grievance with the coalition compact, and they waited for the compact to buy them off with resource credits and a formal apology. 11 times. The compact had paid 11 times. Crestfall was supposed to be 12. I reviewed the Dominion's operational record while the signal played in the background. By the time I reached the 5th incident summary, I had begun to understand something that the Compact's analysis division had, apparently, not found worth flagging. The Dominion's pattern worked because every previous station crew had behaved the way any rational species behaves when outgunned in an enclosed structure. They had sealed themselves in the most defensible section. They had protected the civilians. They had waited. The Dominion had 31 hours to wait. Crestfall was not sealing itself in anything. The voice I had labeled Kowalski, low register, terse, helmet sealed, kept appearing in the background of the transmission at irregular intervals, always moving, always in a different part of the signal's acoustic frame. At the 2-hour mark she had been near the comms array on deck 2. At 3.5 hours, she was somewhere with different atmospheric resonance, a larger space, higher ceiling, the specific hollow ring of an unpressurized junction. At 5 hours, she was back near the array, and I could hear, faintly, the sound of something metal being dragged. "How's Reyes?" she said, to someone off comms. A voice I didn't recognize, stable. "Naomi got the bleeder." "Good. Tell him to stay on the deck and stop trying to help." A pause. "He's not going to." I know. Tell him anyway. And then, the metal scraping resumed, and, whatever Kowalski was building or repositioning or setting up, it took another 40 minutes, and, at the end of those 40 minutes there was a sound from somewhere deeper in the station, a percussion impact, wrong frequency for a pressure event, too sharp for hull stress. A gunshot. Or the Kreth equivalent. Then, another. 3 more in rapid succession. Then, nothing. My secondary auditory organs, the ones calibrated for subsonic vibration rather than direct sound, registered a change in the station's ambient noise profile. Something that had been active engines, pump systems, a particular kind of low mechanical whirring I associated with habitat processing equipment, stopped. Someone had cut power to a section of the station. I was out of my seat before I processed why. Standing at the console. My crest, the ridge of sensory tissue that runs the length of my skull and that my species uses primarily for magnetic orientation, was fully extended. This is not a voluntary response. I noted this in my private log with clinical precision, involuntary crest extension. Possible interpretation, threat assessment heightened. Alternate interpretation, unknown. I contacted the comms relay on channel 7, which was the frequency the crestfall transmitter was keyed to. I said, "This is Signal Arbiter Veth Narrow Station, recording your channel. Acknowledge if able." Static. Then, acknowledged. "This is Kowalski. Who am I talking to?" I told her my designation. I told her I was the arbiter who had received and relayed her distress signal. I told her, because the protocols required it, that Coalition fleet had been dispatched and their estimated arrival was now 26 hours and 40 minutes. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, copy. 2640. Correct. Another pause. In the background I could hear something I could not identify, a rhythmic, intermittent sound, almost organic, and it took me several seconds to parse it as human footsteps, but not one person. Multiple. Moving in coordinated intervals, not together, staggered, the way predator-class organisms move through contested terrain. "Is your garrison?" I started. "We're handling it. The Dominion assault force is estimated at I know what they sent." Her voice had not changed register at all. Not a spike of anything. "We've been counting." There was something under the word counting that I logged but did not know what to do with. A texture. The word had a different weight coming out of her than it would have out of anyone I had spoken to in my career. Not heavier. Not lighter. Different. Like it was a technical term and she was the only one in the conversation who knew the technical definition. "Can you hold?" I asked. The pause before she answered was exactly 4 seconds. I counted. "That's the job," she said. The channel stayed open. She didn't close it. I didn't close it either. I should document here, for the integrity of this log, what a Kreth Dominion boarding force looks like on a station sensor grid, because I was pulling Crestfall's external monitoring data through the relay and I want the record to be complete. The Dominion are bipedal, like humans, but larger, on average 1.5 times the mass, and the mass is not evenly distributed the way mammalian mass usually is. They are dense through the upper body in a way that reads on sensor sweeps as almost geological, and they move in tight formations of 5, each formation assigned a distinct tactical function that their doctrine has refined over approximately 3 centuries of station clearing operations. They are not emotional combatants. They do not posture. They are, by any professional military assessment, extremely good at the specific thing they are doing. They had entered Crestfall through 3 hull breaches on the lower decks. Standard doctrine: create multiple entry vectors, prevent the defenders from concentrating force. They had secured decks 5 and 6 within the first 90 minutes. They had then advanced on deck 4. And stopped. I reviewed the sensor data 3 times before I was willing to put a notation in the log. Because what the sensors showed on deck 4 was not a defensive line. Not a barricade. Not the thermal signatures of personnel sheltering in place. What the sensors showed was 3 Dominion formation signatures that had entered the Deck 4 corridor and had not come out. Not retreated. Not repositioned. Not come out. The fourth formation had pulled back to the junction between decks 4 and 5, and the sensor data from that position showed a thermal profile consistent with a Kreth formation that had stopped moving and was staying stopped. There is a word in the Dominion's own operational doctrine for this state. Their analysts use it to describe enemy units that have been rendered tactically cautious by an unexpected engagement variable. The word translates, roughly, as uncertain. A Kreth Dominion assault force had encountered something on Deck 4 of a mid-tier coalition relay station staffed by 11 human combatants and had become uncertain. I looked at the sensor data for a long time. I looked at the power readings for Deck 4, which were dark, which meant no illumination, which meant whoever was operating on Deck 4 was doing so in complete blackness. I thought about the footsteps I had heard. Staggered. Patient. The kind of movement that is not running and is not hiding and is something else entirely, something my species does not have a precise word for because my species has not, historically, been in the business of hunting in the dark. I picked up the cold container of human seed husk liquid, which I had been told was called coffee, and I drank the rest of it. It tasted like something that had strong opinions. In the log, I wrote, Kreth Advance stalled at Deck 4. Cause unclear. Human personnel unaccounted for in sensor frame. Re-evaluating. Re-evaluating. That was the word I used. At hour 7, I reached Osaveth on his rest period communicator. He was displeased. This was apparent in both his vocal frequency and the fact that when he appeared on the secondary screen, his secondary arms were crossed in the resting configuration rather than the alert one, which in Valesi body language means, I am listening but I want you to know I think this is beneath the dignity of my time. The Kreth Advance has stalled, I said. Equipment malfunction on the sensors. It's been 2 hours. Extended equipment malfunction. Osaveth. He was quiet for a moment. His secondary arms uncrossed, partially. How many did they send? 32. 4 formations of 8. And 11 humans. Yes. One of the formations had a technology advantage. An energy weapon variant we haven't catalogued. That's possible, I said. But the power grid on Deck 4 has been dark for 3 hours, which means whoever is fighting in there is fighting without sensors, without illumination, without any of the technological advantages either side carried in. Osaveth looked at me. Or rather, he looked at the screen that was showing my face, and his crest, which is smaller than mine and differently structured but serves a similar orientation function, shifted. Are they winning? He said. I don't know. I can only see the Dominion formations, and 3 of them haven't moved. The silence that followed was the kind that has something inside it. The coalition fleet, Osaveth said finally. 24 hours and 12 minutes. Another silence. Log it, he said. Whatever it is. Log it properly. Don't file it as equipment artifact. He closed the channel. I reopened my private log. I sat for a moment looking at the entry that read re-evaluating and then I deleted it and wrote something more honest. I don't know what's happening on Deck 4. The humans do. At hour 9, Kowalski came back on the channel. She didn't announce herself. The static just changed texture, that slight compression that means someone has keyed a transmitter manually, and then her voice was there, same flat register, same helmet seal quality. Arbiter. I'm here. We need medical assessment protocols. Do you have a Zenobio attaché aboard? I told her we had a medical systems interface. That works. I've got a Kreth combatant who's wounded. I need to know what I'm dealing with before I touch anything. I stopped. I ran back what she had said. I ran it back again. You have, I said, a wounded Kreth combatant. Affirmative. In your custody. He's not going anywhere. Neither are the other 4. 5. She had 5 prisoners. From a Dominion assault force that had entered her station 32 strong. Kowalski. Yeah. What happened to the other 22? The pause before she answered was longer than 4 seconds this time. 7. 8. I counted. They withdrew, she said. 2 hours ago. Took their equipment, took their formation structure, left in good order. I'm not going after them. Not my job. They withdrew. I said it back to her because I needed to hear it in my own voice. Deck 4 is mine now, she said. And, Deck 3. 5 and 6 are theirs if they want them. They're welcome to the water reclamation units and approximately 400 kilos of archived soil sample data. But, they're not getting further up the station. Through the comms channel, behind her voice, I could hear something. Quiet. Almost periodic. It took me a moment. Someone was laughing. Low, tired, the particular quality of laughter that comes out of a body that has been running on stress hormones for 9 hours and has nothing left but the absurdity of still being alive. I noted in the log, Kreth assault force withdrew. Cause under assessment. 5 prisoners wounded in human custody. 11 human combatants, status unclear. Approximately 24 hours remain before fleet arrival. I looked at what I'd written. Then, I added, requesting medical protocol upload for Kreth physiology. Human station requires it. Not for humans. For the Kreth prisoners. Kowalski had asked for it. I have thought about that a great deal since. The medical protocol upload took 40 minutes because the VETH narrow database had not been updated with the most recent Kreth anatomical indices, which required me to contact the Coalition Xenobiology relay station on a secondary channel while keeping the primary line to Crestfall open, which meant I was running 2 conversations simultaneously while also monitoring the sensor feed from the station's external array and attempting, with moderate success, to track the positioning of the withdrawn Dominion force, which had not left the station's sensor range but had established a holding pattern approximately 2,000 kilometers from the hull. They were waiting. This was expected. Standard Dominion doctrine in a stalled engagement: establish external containment, wait for reinforcement, maintain pressure without committing. They would be back. I transmitted the medical protocols to Crestfall's array. Kowalski acknowledged with a single click, the way spacers do when they're too busy to spare syllables. 3 hours later she came back on the channel. By this time it was well past my official duty period and I had not filed an off-shift handover report, which meant technically I was in dereliction of a minor scheduling regulation and Ozaveth, if he knew, would add it to the list of things he wanted to discuss with me at the next performance review. The protocols worked, she said. He's stable. The Kreth prisoner? Gunshot wound to the secondary respiratory cavity. We packed it. His breathing sounds wrong to me, but the protocol said that was normal post-trauma for his species. That is accurate. A beat. How do you say you're okay in Kreth? I looked at my translation database. I found the closest Kreth standard equivalent. I read it to her, pronunciation guide included. She attempted it. The pronunciation was terrible. Not wrong, exactly, just reshaped by a human mouth into something that had the right components in approximately the right order but sounded less like language and more like an experiment in what language could survive being moved through a different kind of instrument. Does that work? She said. It is recognizable. Yes. Good enough. She was quiet for a moment. He keeps looking at me like he's waiting for something. He may be. Kreth prisoners expect formal processing. They have a protocol for it. It involves a declaration of, I'm not declaring anything. I'm just keeping him alive until the fleet gets here. I noted the following in my private log, which I was increasingly aware would never be filed with the compact and would likely never be read by anyone other than myself. The human is maintaining enemy combatants. Not as leverage. Not as bargaining instruments. Because they are wounded and she is apparently constitutionally unable to leave a wounded thing unattended regardless of what it was doing to her station 6 hours ago. I deleted that. To editorial. I rewrote it, human personnel treating Kreth wounded. Motivation unclear. I looked at that for a moment. Deleted it again. Wrote, Kowalski. That was all. Just the name. I didn't know what else to put. 21 hours before fleet arrival, the Dominion came back. The sensor array lit up like the magnetic storms over my homeworld's polar sea, which is to say, suddenly, comprehensively, in a way that makes the instrument processing system go quiet for a beat before it catches up with what it's reading. The Dominion had not brought their original force back. They had brought 2 additional formations, which meant they now had, by my count, approximately 50 combatants either aboard the station or attempting to breach it from 3 new vectors. I opened the channel. Kowalski was already talking. Not to me. To her people, I could hear at least 4 distinct voices, maybe 5, the acoustic frame full of movement and compressed instruction, and the clipped, information-dense shorthand of people who have been fighting together long enough that they have stripped language down to its load-bearing components. Arbiter, she said, between 2 sets of instructions to people I couldn't see. I see it. 2 additional formations. They've moved to breach vectors on decks 2 and 3. Yeah. A pause filled with something I couldn't read. How long until fleet? 21 hours and 4 minutes. The silence was 3 seconds. Copy, she said. That was all. Not, we can't hold that long. Not, we need more options. Not any of the dozen things that, by my professional assessment, were the accurate responses to 50 Dominion combatants and 21 hours between Crestfall Station and the only help that was coming. Just, copy. Like 21 hours was a logistical variable and not a sentence. I was still processing this when I heard, in the background of the transmission, not alarmed, almost conversational, a voice I recognized as one of the ones I'd been hearing intermittently since hour 3. Younger than Kowalski, a different regional accent to their standard, the particular timbre of someone who laughs at things slightly before other people realize the things are funny. The voice said, hey. I think they brought more. And, Kowalski said, I know. And, the other voice said, cool. Just, cool. My crest was fully extended again. I realized I had been standing for the past 6 minutes. I sat down. I picked up my coffee. It was long cold. I drank it anyway and stared at the sensor feed showing 50 Dominion combatants advancing on a station held by 11 humans who had been awake for, at minimum, 9 hours and who had, by the tone of the one I could hear, decided that 50 was an interesting problem rather than a terminal one. I thought about the word counting, and the weight Kowalski had put under it, and I began to think I was starting to understand the technical definition. And then, the breach alarms went off on decks 2 and 3 simultaneously, and the Crestfall sensor feed became something else entirely, and I pulled up my log and started writing as fast as I could, because whatever was happening on that station, I did not want to miss a moment of it. The breach alarms are a particular frequency. I know this because I have spent my career in rooms adjacent to them. I know what a station breach alarm sounds like on a relay receiver, through atmofiltered transmission, and I know what it sounds like as an abstract data point on a sensor display. I have never, in 418 distress calls, found the sound interesting. The breach alarms on Crestfall were on decks 2 and 3 simultaneously, and the sound of them through the open channel was different from every other breach alarm I had ever catalogued, because through that sound, beneath the station's automated distress tone and the pressure equalization warnings and the distant, structural groan of hull plating taking stress, there was the sound of people who had been waiting for this. Not afraid of it. Waiting for it. Here we go, said the younger voice. The one who thought 50 was cool. Someone else, farther from the transmitter, deck 3 first? Kowalski, deck 3 first. Brennan takes 2. Move. The sounds that followed were difficult to transcribe accurately into a log. I tried. What I wrote was, tactical dispersion. Small unit movement. Coordinated fire responses audible at multiple points within the station's interior acoustic frame. What I heard was something more like a language, a whole grammar of movement and noise that I didn't have the vocabulary for yet, but that was clearly structured, clearly intentional, with syntax I could feel even if I couldn't parse every word of it. The Dominion had 50 combatants. They had 3 breach vectors. They had 3 centuries of station clearing doctrine. The humans had 11 people, a station they'd been living in for an unknown period of time, and whatever they'd been doing for the last 9 hours in the dark. I kept the channel open. I watched the sensor feed. I drank cold coffee and tried to document what I was seeing with the tools available to me, which were designed for a different kind of observation entirely. 40 minutes into the second engagement, I received an unexpected second signal. Not from Crestfall. From the Dominion command ship, which had moved into the outer sensor range of my relay array at some point in the last hour and which was, I now noticed, broadcasting on a coalition-registered emergency frequency. The broadcast was in Creth standard with a coalition translation header attached, which meant it was intended to be overheard and logged. I logged it. The Dominion commander, a rank designation that translated roughly as advanced sealer, meaning the officer responsible for a station's seizure operation, was filing a formal grievance with the coalition compact. The grievance stated that the Crestfall station crew had violated the established protocols of the Kereth Passage Territorial Agreement by employing non-standard engagement methodology during a legitimate territorial access action. The phrase non-standard engagement methodology appeared 3 times in the grievance. It was not defined. I studied that phrase for a long time. In 31 years as a signal arbiter, I had processed a lot of Dominion formal grievances. They had a very precise vocabulary. When the Dominion wanted to say that enemy combatants had used prohibited weapons, they said that. When they wanted to say combatants had violated prisoner conventions, they said that too. Their legal language was exhaustive and specific. Non-standard engagement methodology was not a phrase I had encountered in their formal documentation before. I sent the grievance to my archived database and ran a search. It came back empty. The Dominion had invented that phrase for this specific grievance. For this specific station. For what was happening on Crestfall right now, which was something that apparently did not fit into any existing category in their operational lexicon. In my private log, I wrote, Dominion Command filing formal grievance engagement methodology. Grievance language suggests the Dominion does not have established vocabulary for what the humans are doing to them. I looked at the sensor feed. The 3 breach teams were inside the station. The sensor data was fragmented. Whoever had cut power to Deck 4 had done the same to sections of 2 and 3, leaving irregular dark patches in the grid that the Dominion formations had to cross to advance. The dark patches weren't random. They were. I kept looking at the feed, tilting my head, trying to find the right frame for what I was seeing. They were specific. Placed. Each dark zone was at a junction point, a choke point, somewhere that funneled movement into a particular corridor, a particular turn, a particular configuration. The humans had done this before the second assault began. During the 3-hour lull after the first withdrawal. While Kowalski was treating Kreth prisoners and asking me how to say you're okay in a language that wasn't hers. They had been building this. I thought about what the advanced sealers force experienced as they crossed into those dark patches. Not just no light, no sensors, no targeting assist, no formation coordination because the communication equipment the Dominion used for internal formation comms operated on a frequency that, I was now noticing, fell within the same spectrum that the Crestfall electrical infrastructure would have been broadcasting before the power cuts. When you cut the power to a specific grid section, you didn't just kill the lights. You killed the frequencies. The Dominion formations were moving blind. Not just visually. Electromagnetically. The humans knew this station. They knew it the way things know spaces they've lived in, not the technical diagrams, not the equipment specifications, but the way a corridor sounds at different times of day cycle, the way the pressure differentials shift between deck transitions, the way you know without looking where your hand is going to land when you reach for something in the dark. The Dominion had 3 centuries of doctrine. The humans had this station. In my career, I have read analyses of 612 planetary and orbital military engagements. In every one, the advantage matrix assigns a significant force multiplier to numerical superiority, equipment quality, and established tactical doctrine. Home terrain familiarity is listed as a contributing variable, minor tier, with a standard multiplier of 1.3. I was watching something that was making that multiplier look like a rounding error. Kowalski came back on the channel at the 1-hour mark of the second engagement. She did not sound like someone in the middle of a battle. She sounded like someone who was in the middle of several simultaneous very complicated tasks and was frustrated that one of them had become slightly more complicated than anticipated. Arbiter. I need you to do something for me. Yes. I need you to pull the structural schematics for the water reclamation units on decks 5 and 6 and cross-reference them with the station's primary pressure manifold routing. The maintenance log should be in the relay archive. The consortium filed quarterly updates. I was already pulling files. What am I looking for? Tell me if the reclamation venting system connects to the main ventilation exchange on deck 3. I found the schematics. I found the quarterly maintenance logs. I cross-referenced. Yes, I said. Reclamation secondary venting routes through deck 3 junction C7 before exchanging to exterior. A pause. Something that sounded like a satisfied exhale. Perfect, she said. And then, to someone nearby, tell Reyes, yeah, I know he's supposed to be resting, tell him anyway, the reclamation connection routes through C7. He'll know what to do with that. Kowalski, I said. What are you planning? Nothing that's going to damage the station, she said. Probably. The reclamation vents have a cycle time of about 40 seconds. When they cycle, the pressure differential in junction C7 changes enough that the door seals engage automatically. Both ends. It's a safety mechanism. I went back to the schematic. I found the safety mechanism. I found junction C7, and I found where the Dominion's Deck 3 breach team was positioned on the sensor feed, which was approximately 12 meters from junction C7, advancing toward what I had assumed was the main station crew quarters. I said, you're going to trap them in the junction. For about 40 seconds, yeah. Enough time for Brennan's team to reposition. That requires someone to manually trigger the reclamation cycle out of sequence. Reyes is very good at manual triggers. A beat. He's also going to be deeply annoyed that I interrupted his recovery time, which he'll make very clear to me in the debrief, and I'm going to have to listen to it, and that's fine. I thought about Reyes injured, being treated for a bleeder, resting on deck 2, getting up to manually trigger an out-of-sequence water reclamation cycle to trap a Crethasalt formation in a corridor for 40 seconds to give his teammates room to move. I thought about the word fine. Acknowledged, I said. Junction C7 confirmed. Thank you. She was already moving off channel, already saying something to someone I couldn't see, already 3 steps into the next problem. I heard the transmission key click and, then, she was gone again. I stared at the sensor feed. I watched the Deck 3 formation approach junction C7. I watched the formation enter C7. I watched the door seals engage. I watched 43 seconds pass, slightly longer than expected, which I logged as Reyes, equipment complication, result, while the Deck 3 formation was stationary, contained, unable to advance. On the sensor feed, Deck 2 showed Brennan's team repositioning. I couldn't see exactly what they were moving to, because the dark patches prevented it, but the thermal signatures I could read were moving with a direction and coherence that looked less like retreat and more like something locking into place. The C7 seals disengaged. The Deck 3 formation advanced again. Into a corridor that had been a different corridor 30 seconds ago. Whatever Brennan's team had set up, I didn't see it happen. I only saw the results. The Deck 3 formation's thermal signatures compressed, shifted, and then, over the next 12 minutes, stopped advancing. The sensor feed showed me the formation holding position. Not destroyed. Not retreating. Holding. The Dominion's operational doctrine had 17 defined tactical states for a station-clearing formation. I knew them all. Holding under uncertainty was one. Awaiting command resolution was another. Tactical reassessment was a third. I didn't know which one the Deck 3 formation was in. I'm not sure it mattered, because the outcome for Kowalski's purposes was the same, they had stopped. I opened my log and typed, the humans are not fighting them. They are managing them. There is a difference. 19 hours before fleet arrival, I received a second communication from an unexpected source. The Coalition Compact Auxiliary Dispatch, the same relay station that had told me their assets were unavailable 31 hours ago, had apparently been monitoring my channel logs, which they had every right to do, as the Veth Nero was a compact registered vessel, and they sent me a priority yellow message asking for a status update on Crestfall Station. Priority yellow. Not red. Yellow. I filed a status update, station under active engagement, second assault wave, 11 human combatants maintaining position, enemy force approximately 50, fleet ETA 19 hours, station operationally intact. The reply came back in 11 minutes, noted. Recommend standard monitoring protocol until fleet arrival. No action required. No action required. I stared at that for a while. Then, I wrote back, confirmed. Continuing monitoring. I continued monitoring. At hour 14 of the second engagement, that is, approximately 14 hours into a battle that the math said should have been over in the first 4, something changed in the sensor data. Not an abrupt change. Not the kind of change that registers as an event. A gradual one. The kind that you only see if you're watching continuously, tracking the aggregate pattern rather than any individual data point. The Dominion formations were contracting. Not retreating to the breach points. Not withdrawing to the external holding position. Contracting, pulling back from their most forward positions on decks 2 and 3, consolidating on 5 and 6. The movement was organized. It had the signature of a formation command decision, not a route. Someone on that Dominion ship had made a call. I checked the external sensor range. The command ship was still there. Still broadcasting on that coalition emergency frequency. The formal grievance was still running. I had, by this point, received the 3rd through 7th addenda, each one more detailed than the last in its descriptions of non-standard engagement methodology, though no addendum had yet defined what the methodology actually was, which I was beginning to suspect was because the Dominion did not have the vocabulary. The grievance had, by Addendum 7, acquired a new phrase, psychologically destabilizing engagement patterns. I logged that one separately. Filed it under worth examining later. On Crestfall's comms, things had gone quiet. Not the quiet of the first engagement's dark hours, when there had been ambient movement and the distant sounds of combat and the knowledge that something was happening that I couldn't fully see. This was a different kind of quiet. The kind that comes after sustained effort, when the immediate crisis has changed shape and the body or the sensor grid needs a moment to recalibrate. I opened the channel. Kowalski. A longer wait than usual. Then, still here. The Dominion formations have contracted to decks 5 and 6. Another pause. Yeah. We saw. She sounded, I searched my vocabulary for the right word. Not tired, exactly. Tired is the absence of energy. This was different. This was the sound of a body that had spent a great deal of energy on a specific task and was now in the moment after, when the task is not done but the immediate expenditure is complete and the accounting hasn't been taken yet. Your casualties? Mendez has a dislocated shoulder. Reyes is going to need real medical attention when the fleet arrives, not just Naomi's excellent field packing. Everyone else is a pause. Everyone else is standing. 11 combatants. 14 hours. 50 Dominion personnel, fresh formations, 3 centuries of doctrine. Everyone still standing. Kowalski, I said. Yeah. Why? I stopped. That wasn't the right word. I mean, how are you? That wasn't right either. I paused for long enough that she might have thought I had dropped the channel. What's the question? She said. Not impatient. Just checking. The Dominion pulled back, I said. Not fully. Not to the breach points. To decks 5 and 6. I have been trying to assess the tactical rationale and I cannot determine whether this represents a genuine strategic withdrawal, a consolidation for a third assault, or I stopped again. Or they're trying to figure out what we are, Kowalski said. I said nothing. That's the question you're trying to ask, she said. right? You want to know why they haven't just pushed through. They have the numbers. They should have pushed through 10 hours ago. Yes. The pause before she answered was long enough that I counted it. 12 seconds. Because we're not behaving like a garrison, she said finally. A garrison holds ground. Fortifies. Tries to compress the enemy's movement options while minimizing their own exposure. That's rational. That's what they trained for. I heard her shift a change in the sound of the transmission, like she'd moved her position. We're not doing that. What are you doing? We're trading. Every time they advance, they spend more than they wanted to and we move somewhere they didn't expect. We're not trying to stop them. We're trying to make every inch cost a beat. In 53 years of passage operations, every station they've hit has been trying to stop them. None of them have tried to make it expensive. Because eventually you run out of inches to trade, I said. Yeah. No hesitation. Just acknowledgement. But, we've got 19 hours and, I know this station and, they don't. So. That small word carrying the weight of a decision made and, not undone. Not bravado. Not performance. The word so meaning, here are the facts as I understand them and, here is the only thing that makes sense to do next. I thought about the Dominion's 7th addendum. About psychologically destabilizing engagement patterns. I thought about what it must look like from inside a formation doctrine 3 centuries old to encounter an enemy that is not trying to defeat you and is not trying to survive you, but is instead simply committed to making you remember every step. I thought about a word in my own language, reshape, which my culture uses to describe the particular discomfort of trying to process something that has no assigned category. Something that your understanding reaches for and finds no grip on. I was experiencing reshape. Looking at the sensor feed. Thinking about 19 hours. The Dominion, I suspected, was experiencing something similar. In my private log, beneath the entry that just said Kowalski, I wrote, she is not trying to win. She has agreed, rationally, with complete clarity, to hold 19 hours and, she has built a system to do it. She has made a trade that I am not certain I could make. Then, the Dominion does not understand this because the Dominion has never met anyone who made this trade voluntarily. Then, I am not sure I understood it either. Until now. 16 hours before fleet arrival, the Dominion made their third push. This one was different. They sent all 4 formations simultaneously, abandoned the sequential breach and advance doctrine that had failed twice, and hit all 3 remaining breach vectors at the same time with their full consolidated force. It was a reasonable tactical evolution. If the problem with the previous attempts was that the humans could focus their response on a sequential advance, the solution was to force them to divide. 50 combatants. 3 vectors. 11 defenders. The math was clear. The math had been clear for 16 hours. I had the channel open. I was watching the sensor feed. I had abandoned any pretense of logging this in real time because the logging was taking my attention and I was not willing to divide my attention. What I watched, over the next 90 minutes, was something I am still not certain I can describe accurately. The humans did not divide to cover 3 vectors. They didn't have enough people to divide effectively, and Kowalski clearly knew that. What they did instead was something that took me 40 minutes to understand and another 20 to believe I was reading correctly. They let 1 vector through. Deck 5. They let the Dominion advance up Deck 5 unopposed. The sensor data showed a clear path, no dark patches, no junction traps, no thermal signatures of human personnel. Just corridor. The Dominion formation on Deck 5 advanced. Fast. Clean. The kind of advance that happens when a formation has been grinding through resistance for hours and, suddenly, finds open ground. There's an acceleration, almost a relief, the body language of a force that thinks it has found the seam. They advanced up Deck 5 to Junction F9. At Junction F9, the lights came back on. Not the station lights. Not the restored main power. Something different, portable illumination, the kind of emergency lighting array you find in maintenance caches, positioned to create a very specific lighting geometry. The kind of geometry that puts a moving formation directly in front of a very bright light source, backlit, silhouetted, with zero ability to see what is in front of them. The kind of geometry that had nothing to do with the tactical situation on the schematic and everything to do with the tactical situation as it existed in this specific corridor, in this specific moment, for 11 people who had been in this station long enough to know exactly where the maintenance caches were. The sensor feed went complicated after that. Thermal data, pressure data, acoustic data all running simultaneously in a frame that was too full to resolve cleanly. What I could read, the junction F9 formation stopped. Not from fire, from the sudden disorientation of moving from darkness into blinding light with human personnel already in position ahead of them. 40 seconds. 60. I was watching the other two vectors. The Deck 2 and 3 formations were inside the dark patches, grinding through Kowalski's field of prepared corridor geometry, slower, cautious, because they had learned to be cautious. And they were inside the dark patches. Which meant their formation communication was compromised. Which meant they didn't know the Deck 5 formation had stopped. And, while all three formations were committed inside the station, inside the geometry, inside the dark patches and the blinding lights, the sensor feed on Deck 4 showed a thermal signature moving toward the Deck 5 formation's rear. Single signature. Small. Moving carefully. Reyes. I checked the medical protocol data I still had open from 4 hours ago. I checked the wound assessment I had run with Kowalski when she asked me how to say you're okay in Kreth. Secondary respiratory cavity damage. Packed wound. Rest recommended. Reyes. He had come up behind the Deck 5 formation through a route that the sensor data suggested was approximately 3 corridors behind where any tactical calculus would have placed a useful human combatant. I say approximately because the route was in a dark zone and I could not trace all of it. I could only see his entry into the sensor visible area near junction F9. And I could see the Deck 5 formation's response when they became aware of a hostile signature behind them. Not a panic. A calculation. A Kreth formation, faced with blinding light ahead and a confirmed contact to the rear, runs a very specific risk assessment. It's in their doctrine. The result of that assessment, when the risk parameters reach a threshold, is a mandatory pullback to defensive formation. It's designed to prevent encirclement. It requires a minimum of 2 confirmed hostiles in a flanking position. Reyes was one person. One injured person. In a dark corridor. Behind a formation of 8. The doctrine counted 2. I have thought about this part more than any other part. I don't know what Reyes did. I couldn't see it. I know what the sensor data showed, 1 thermal signature, in a dark corridor, behind 8. I know that the Deck 5 formation pulled back per their encirclement prevention protocol. I know that the pullback took them out of junction F9 and back through the territory they'd advanced through, which was no longer unoccupied because Kowalski's team had repositioned during the push on 2 and 3 and the sonic geography of the station had changed again while everyone was looking at something else. I know that one of the Crestfall crew, I could not identify which voice, said, on the open channel, with the particular exhausted satisfaction of someone solving an equation they weren't sure was solvable, that's it. That's the one. And I know that at 17 hours and 12 minutes into the second assault, the sensor data showed all 3 Dominion formations contracting back toward Decks 5 and 6, and this time the movement had a different signature. Not consolidation. Not pause and reassess. The movement had the signature of formations that have run their operational parameters and hit a boundary condition. The Dominion's third push was over. 15 hours and 48 minutes before Coalition fleet arrival. In my private log, I did not write anything about tactics or thermal signatures or doctrine parameters. I wrote, Reyes went into that corridor injured. And then, I sat with that for a while. And then, I closed the log and reached for the cold coffee and found the container empty and spent a long moment looking at it. Outside the Veth Narrows viewport, the stars were the same stars they had always been. Distant. Uninterested. The kind of old that has no opinion about the things happening in the spaces between them. I thought about Kowalski saying that's the job in response to whether she could hold. I thought about the Dominion's 7th addendum. Psychologically destabilizing engagement patterns. I opened a new file in my log, separate from the private one, and I titled it Preliminary Assessment, Non-Standard Engagement Methodology, Crestfall Station. I stared at the blank field under the title for a long time. I typed, "To be continued." Because it was. Because there were still 15 hours and 48 minutes. And, because whatever I wrote in that assessment, I was increasingly certain that no category I had available to me was going to be sufficient. I was going to need new ones. And, I thought, and this was not a professional thought, this was not a signal arbiter thought, this was something that came from somewhere in my neurology that does not have a proper designation in my species anatomy charts. I thought that the category I was going to need had probably already been named by someone. I just hadn't known to look for it. Yet. 13 hours before fleet arrival, the Dominion stopped moving. Not their usual pause and consolidate. Not the careful deceleration of a formation reconsidering its approach. The entire sensor feed went static, all Dominion signatures holding in the same positions on decks 5 and 6, no realignment, no internal formation shift, nothing that read as preparation for a fourth push. They were sitting. Osaveth came back on shift at the 12-hour mark. He looked at my station, at the 6 overlapping data feeds I had running, at the private log still open in the corner, at the empty coffee container I had been unconsciously picking up and putting down for the last 3 hours, and he said nothing for 37 seconds. Then, he said, "You've been here the whole time." "I went off shift late," I said. "I stayed on." "That's not what I said." He looked at the sensor feed. "What's the status?" I told him. All of it, the 3 pushes, the withdrawals, the junction traps, the reclamation cycle, Reyes and the corridor, the formal grievance addenda, the Dominion holding at decks 5 and 6. I told him efficiently, without editorializing, because Osaveth deserves accurate information and I have enough self-awareness to know that my objectivity on this situation had become questionable somewhere around hour 7. When I finished, he was quiet for longer than usual. His secondary arms were not crossed. They were extended slightly at his sides, which in Valesi body language is the configuration for "I am processing something I did not expect." He said, 11 of them. Yes. Against how many total? They encountered 50 in the second and third assault waves. The initial force was 32. And they're still in the station. Yes. He looked at the feed for a while. Then, what are the Dominion doing? Waiting. I paused. I've been trying to determine whether they're waiting for reinforcement or waiting for something else. Something else. They sent the formal grievance to the compact. 14 hours ago. The compact acknowledged it. No action has been initiated. I pulled up the addenda on a secondary screen. The grievance uses the phrase psychologically destabilizing engagement patterns in Addendum 7. I've been trying to find precedent for that language in Dominion operational doctrine. And there isn't any. Osaveth was quiet. His secondary arms moved in a small involuntary motion that I have only ever seen him make in 2 other circumstances, when presented with navigational data that contradicts a confirmed calculation, and, once, years ago, when a first contact encounter generated sensor readings that had no biological precedent. He said, "They don't know how to log it." That's my current assessment, yes. They can't file the complaint properly because they can't name what happened to them. He turned to look at me. "Have you named it?" I thought about the blank field in my preliminary assessment. I thought about the category I had decided I would need new terminology for. "No," I said. "Not yet." He looked at the screen for another moment. Then, he went to the break bay, retrieved a second container of coffee, and put it on my console without saying anything. I didn't point out that I'd noticed what he did. That seemed like the wrong kind of acknowledgement. 11 hours before fleet arrival, Kowalski came on the channel for reasons that had nothing to do with tactical coordination. I know this because she opened with, "Are you still there, Arbiter?" Not a status request. Not a data query. Something else, with a texture I had been learning to identify. Yes, I said. Good. A pause. How long until the fleet gets here? 11 hours and 4 minutes. Okay. Another pause. Something in the background, a low ambient sound, persistent, that took me a moment to place. It was voices. Plural. Not mission-critical communication. Conversation. The Crestfall crew was talking to each other. Your team, I said. Yeah. Deck 2, what's left of the mess facilities? Naomi found a working heating element and she's making something with the emergency rations. I don't want to know what it is. A beet. It smells actually pretty good, which is worse. I noted this. Not in the official log. In the private one, after 31 hours of continuous engagement, with 11 hours remaining, the crew of Crestfall Station is in the mess hall. Someone is cooking. The Dominion is holding position, I said. No advance preparation visible. I know. We're watching the deck sensors. A slight shift in her voice, the acoustic change that means someone has moved slightly toward or away from the transmitter. I think they're deciding. Deciding what? Whether they want Deck 4 badly enough to try again. She paused. I don't think they do. But, I'm not betting Reyes on it. How is Reyes? Being difficult about his recovery period. Naomi won't let him eat anything until he sits down and stays down, and he keeps arguing with her that he's sitting down, he's just also standing. I heard a faint noise, something between a sigh and a laugh, compressed, tired. She's winning. There was something in that exchange that I found myself wanting to log precisely and was not sure I had the tools to. A medic who treats everyone arguing with an injured combatant about the difference between sitting and standing, 11 hours from the end of a 31-hour engagement that by every calculation should have ended in their capture, possibly their deaths, and the thing being contested is whether standing counts as rest. I thought about the Kreth prisoner. The one Kowalski had asked me to source medical protocols for. The one she had tried to say you're okay to in terrible, instrument-reshaped Kreth standard. The prisoners, I said. The 5 Kreth combatants. Still with us. Stable. A beat. The one with the long wound, Naomi's been with him most of the day. His colors changed. Better, according to your protocols. Another beat. He tried to sit up this morning. She pushed him back down. He didn't fight her. He didn't. No. Kowalski's voice had a texture I was by now able to identify as something that happens when she is reporting a fact that she finds interesting rather than simply informative. He's been watching her. The whole time. He has very still eyes, Kreth, or maybe it's just him, I don't know. He just watches her work. I thought about a Kreth Dominion assault combatant, captured during a boarding operation he participated in, watching a human medic work on him with the same careful attention that a biologist brings to an organism they have never encountered before and are not certain is safe and cannot stop observing. Kowalski. Yeah. What are you going to do with them? After the fleet arrives? She didn't answer immediately. 8 seconds. 9. That's the fleet's call, she said. They'll be processed per coalition prisoner convention. A pause. The lung one, I'm going to make sure the fleet medical team knows about the secondary cavity packing. They might not think to check. I'll flag it in my relay to the fleet medical lead. Thank you. She said it plainly. Not formally. The way you say it to someone who did something useful rather than something officially required. I was quiet for a moment. Then, you asked me how to say you're okay in Kreth. Yeah. Did you use it? A very long pause. He looked at me like I'd said something in the wrong language, she said finally. Which I had. But, he stopped reaching for his sidearm after that, so. A beat. I think the sentiment got through even if the pronunciation didn't. 8 hours before fleet arrival, the Dominion made their decision. They didn't push. The sensor data showed the formations on decks 5 and 6 reorganizing not into assault configuration, into extraction configuration. Pulling equipment. Consolidating casualties, of which they had, the sensor signatures suggested, a significant number from the second and third engagements. Moving toward the breach points on the lower decks. They were leaving. Voluntarily. Not in the context of a tactical withdrawal to regroup. Leaving, in the way that an operation that has reached its parameters and found them insufficient simply ends, because the alternative is to keep paying a price the math no longer supports. I opened the channel. Kowalski. Saw it. Her voice had a flatness that I had learned was not the absence of emotion but its very compressed form. They're pulling out. Yes. All of them? All sensor signatures consistent with extraction movement. I checked the external data. The command ship has moved to retrieval position. ETA to their breach points approximately 40 minutes. Okay. A breath. Okay. The word okay is very small. It does not seem like a word that should carry the weight of 31 hours of something that the Dominion had no vocabulary for, and neither, entirely, did I. But it was the word she used, and the way she used it, with space before and after it, with the particular quality of sound that comes out of a chest that has been holding something tightly for a long time and is now, cautiously, releasing, made me understand that there is a version of okay that means we are still here, and that was the only thing that mattered, and it is, somehow, still true. I wrote it in the log. Just the word, just that one, at that moment. Okay. The Dominion was gone in 53 minutes. Their breach seals contracted behind them with a precision that was, despite everything, professional. The station's automated repair systems began cycling on the lower decks. Crestfall's power grid started coming back up in sections, not restored to full, not yet, but coming back, deck by deck, the lights returning in an order that started at the bottom and worked up. I watched the sensor data change from the topology of a contested space into something that looked, incrementally, like a station at the beginning of its own recovery. The fleet arrived 6 hours and 42 minutes early. I note this because it was unexpected, and because the unexpected things in this log deserve recording as carefully as everything else. The advanced element was 3 patrol vessels, not the capital ship response I had been told to expect, smaller, faster, the kind of fleet assets that get dispatched when someone in a command position reviews a relay signal from a signal arbiter who has been on an open channel with a human station for 31 hours and decides that perhaps the standard ETA should be revisited. I don't know who made that call. The dispatch records listed it as a tactical reassessment in response to updated intelligence analysis, which is the institutional language for someone looked at the data and changed their mind. I would have liked to send that person a coffee. The lead patrol vessel established a calm channel with me on approach. The officer on the line, a Veluan, rank approximately equivalent to a fleet captain, asked me for a status summary. I gave her everything. Unedited. The 31 hours, the 3 pushes, the junction geometry, Reyes in the corridor, the 5 prisoners, the Dominion withdrawal. I gave her the formal grievance addenda. I gave her my preliminary assessment with its blank categorization field. When I finished, she was quiet for 7 seconds. Then, she said, 11 combatants. Yes. Station intact? Decks 5 and 6 have hull damage from the Dominion's initial breach. Decks 2 through 4 are operational. Deck 1 was never compromised. I checked my data. The water reclamation units on 5 and 6 may require maintenance inspection before they return to full cycle. The crew used them tactically and the system logged an out-of-sequence operation that the automated diagnostics will flag. Another pause. They used the reclamation units as a tactical asset. Yes. A very long pause. I'm going to want to talk to their commanding officer, she said. Kowalski, I said. That's the name I have. Signal arbiter. Her voice had changed slightly. The formal distance that Veluan officers maintain in professional communications had shifted, not abandoned, just compressed, the same compression I had heard in Kowalski's voice at specific moments. You've been on this channel for 31 hours. Yes. She stopped. Start it again. That's beyond your duty parameters. I'm aware. Another pause. Why? It was not the kind of question that official channels usually produce. It was genuinely curious. The Veluan officer wanted to know, not for a report, but for herself. I thought about how to answer it. I thought about Asabetha's question from 7 hours ago, have you named it? And the blank field in my preliminary assessment and the category I had been slowly building for 31 hours without knowing that was what I was doing. I needed to know what happened next, I said. She accepted that. Maybe she understood it. Maybe she was going to think about it later and find something in it that I had already found and was still examining. Connecting to Crestfall channel, she said. I kept the relay open while the fleet officers communicated with the station. Procedurally, I was not required to. The compact protocols allow for signal handover once a relief force has arrived, and, from a logging perspective, my work was done. The incident would go into the official record as a Kareth Passage territorial action, station defense, outcome, successful, Dominion withdrawal confirmed. It would be a clean file. Small. Efficient. I kept the relay open anyway. I heard Kowalski brief the fleet captain. She was precise, professional, commendably brief. She said 11 personnel, no fatalities, 2 requiring immediate medical attention, 5 Kreth prisoners in stable condition requiring fleet medical review. She gave numbers, coordinates, damage assessments. She did not say, we held. She did not say, we did something the Dominion had no words for. She did not say anything that would require the fleet captain to evaluate what the 31 hours meant rather than what they resulted in. She just gave the facts, and the facts were what they were. The fleet captain asked, how did you hold the breaches with 11 personnel? A pause. I counted. 4 seconds. Systematically, Kowalski said. I wrote that in my log. Then, I closed the preliminary assessment with the blank categorization field, the one titled Non-Standard Engagement Methodology, Crestfall Station, and I looked at the blank field for a while. I typed, C. Kowalski. C. 11. C. 31 hours. C. OK. That was not a proper entry. I knew that. I filed it anyway. The Vethnero was scheduled to complete its relay rotation and move to the next waypoint in the system 17 hours after the fleet arrived. Asaveth handled the departure protocols. I was, technically, on a rest period that I had now delayed by approximately 14 hours, and he was firm about this in the way that Asaveth is firm when he thinks you are doing something that he also would have done and is therefore not able to criticize without hypocrisy, so instead he criticizes the schedule. He said, go rest. I'll close the Crestfall channel. You can leave it open, I said. They might need data. The fleet is there. They don't need a relay arbiter. No, I agreed. They don't. I stayed at my station for another 20 minutes anyway, and Asaveth did not say anything else about it. The Crestfall channel had gone quiet, not transmission silence, just the ordinary quiet of a station with fleet docked and a crew that had been through 31 hours of something and was now in the decompression phase, which has its own sound. Lower. Softer. The sounds of people who have been running on the specific frequency that exists between endurance and necessity and are now, slowly, partially, not entirely because you don't come all the way back from that quickly returning to a different register. I heard Naomi arguing with Reyes about sitting down. I heard someone whose voice I didn't recognize laughing at something I couldn't catch. I heard, very faintly, someone singing. Low, without much volume, the way you sing when you're not performing the song but just having it. Keeping it company. The melody was not anything I recognized and I had accessed 3 different Xena music databases in the course of my career. It was something private. Something that belonged to whoever was singing it. I did not log it. Some things are not for logs. The last thing I logged in my private file, before I closed it and initiated the rotation handover, was not about the tactical analysis. It was not about the Dominion's operational failure or the formal grievance or the categories I still didn't have proper names for. It was about the Kreth prisoner. The one with the secondary respiratory wound. The one who had stopped reaching for his sidearm after Kowalski said something terrible in his language that meant, apparently, "You're okay." When the fleet medical team came aboard and began processing the prisoners, their reports went through the standard relay and I had access to them as part of my station logging duties. The lung wound prisoner was logged as ambulatory, wound stable, vitals within species normal range, expressing non-hostile behavioral indicators. Non-hostile behavioral indicators is the medical notation for a prisoner who is not resisting. Below that, added as a note by the fleet medic who processed him, patient appears to be requesting accommodation of one specific crew member during transport. Identification made by gesture, prisoner indicates human female, approximately standard height, in gray environmental suit with shoulder patch showing damage. Nature of request unclear. Accommodating where possible. I looked at that entry for a long time. Then, I looked at the entry that said Kowalski in my private log, alone on its own line, just the name. I thought about the word okay, mispronounced in a broken instrument, crossing the distance between two species who had been trying to kill each other 14 hours ago. I thought about how every other station in the Kareth passage had been taken. 11 of them. 11 clean files. The compact had paid 11 times. The math was clear, and the math said the math said the math. And then, this station. This specific station. These 11 specific people who had been awake for 31 hours and were now eating something unidentifiable in a damaged mess hall while a wounded man argued about whether standing counted as rest. I have, in my career, documented over 400 distress calls. I have logged outcomes, processed grievances, filed incident summaries. I know the vocabulary of the Compact's official record very well. I know what fits into it and what doesn't. I know that my preliminary assessment, non-standard engagement methodology, Crestfall Station, was going to go to the Compact Analysis Division, where someone was going to read it and assign it a category and file it, and that category was not going to be adequate. The categories were not going to be adequate. The Dominion's grievance language was not adequate. My own training was not adequate. I thought about this. I thought about Asaveth, who had laughed at a distress call from a species that cannot hold an orbital platform against a Dominion assault force with 11 personnel for 31 hours. I thought about how the Dominion had not laughed. The Dominion had taken the Crestfall distress call very seriously and had sent 32 professionals and then 50 and had eventually left with casualties and a 7th formal grievance addendum and a phrase they had invented because the existing phrases didn't fit. I thought about the Compact's Analysis Division, receiving my assessment, reaching for their categories. In my official file, I entered the outcome notation: Station Crestfall, defense successful, enemy withdrawal confirmed, no fatalities, coalition assets secured, prisoners remanded to fleet custody. I transmitted it. Clean. Efficient. Accurate in every fact. In my private log, I wrote one more thing. Not for the Compact. Not for Asaveth. Not for any record that was going to go anywhere. I wrote it for myself, because I was going to need to look at it later, when I was off shift and rested and the cognitive distance would let me say it properly. I wrote, we laughed at the distress call. Asaveth laughed. Dispatch laughed. I noted the resource figures and processed the forms. The Dominion didn't laugh. They knew, based on 3 centuries of precedent, that there was nothing to laugh at. They were correct in this. The precedent was the problem. 11 people in a station the Dominion has never failed to take. 31 hours. No fatalities. The Kreth soldier who tried to kill Kowalski this morning is requesting proximity to her during transport, and she will probably make sure the fleet medics accommodate it because she is apparently constitutionally unable to leave a wounded thing unattended, and this is not a strategic calculation. This is not a survival optimization. This is not, as far as I can determine, rational behavior by any framework I have. I have been a signal arbiter for 31 years. I have processed 418 distress calls. None of them have required me to create new categories. I am creating new categories. I don't know what to put in them yet. I think it will take time. I think the dataset is still expanding. There are more human stations in the passage, more human crews, more distress calls that are going to come in on dead channels from frequencies we don't recognize, and someone is going to have to receive them and decide whether they're probable equipment artifacts. I am going to receive them. I am going to keep the channel open. I closed the log. I stood up from my station. I picked up the coffee container, the second one Asaveth had put on my console without saying anything, and I found it was still, faintly, warm. Outside the viewport, the stars did not have opinions about what had happened in the space between them. They were old in the way that makes 31 hours seem small. But the hours had happened. And, somewhere on Crestfall Station, in a damaged mess hall that smelled like an unidentifiable emergency ration, 11 people were still there. I thought, they will always have been there. 31 hours from now, a year from now, in whatever history the compact eventually makes out of the next 100 distress calls from the passage, they will always have been in that station, in the dark, on deck 4, counting. I don't know what word to use for that. I'm going to find one.